Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining the Bluetongue virus UK outbreak update hosted by AHDB and partners this evening. My name is Nerys Wright. I work in the regional team at AHDB and I cover the southeast and eastern regions, which you'll well be aware that they're the two regions currently affected by Bluetongue. Checking if my slides are working. So yeah, welcome to the webinar. Thank you for joining us. It has been unprecedented number of bookings we've had over the last 5 days. The webinar is being recorded. The recording will be circulated within 24 hours, and if people registered but weren't able to attend, then they will still get a recording of the webinar circulated to them. So do feel free to forward that on to any colleagues who may not have registered in time. This is an introductory webinar today, and we're hoping it will be the first in a series over the next coming months, depending on how the situation changes and the demand from yourselves as well. We've got 3 excellent speakers lined up this evening. Oh no, we've got 4, very sorry, we've got 4 speakers. That's a huge error on my part. And following the 4 speakers, we will have an opportunity to answer some of your questions. Now, we have, as I've mentioned, had a large number of registrations, so please do bear with us. If we're not able to answer your question this evening, then we will follow up the most common questions and populate a frequently asked question document that we have, so please do bear with us. Please put your questions in the chat. There is a chat function within the GoToWebinar. Please place them in there as they come up, preferably, because if we leave it till the end and we have a mass exodus and mass import, it's going to be quite tricky for me to try and manage those and see what the most popular questions are. For those of you who are joining as farmers or as vets as well, please be aware we also have a farmer webinar running in conjunction with the National Sheep Association tomorrow evening. If any of your farmers would be interested in joining that, here is a link to the event. Now, at the end of the webinar, a feedback form will automatically appear at the end of the webinar. So please do complete that, and please utilise that to populate any topics that you are specifically interested in today. It may be that you would like further information from all of the speakers this evening, but please do populate that, and then we can meet demand for the most popular comments. We just wanted to launch a poll. So Christian, who is my colleague, is working in the background. We just wanted to get some idea of the capacity in which you're joining us this evening. So it could be that you're a vet and a farmer, so you are able to answer 2 of those questions, but we just wanted to see what we've got, and just to make sure that we are tailoring the attendance. And again, just to highlight that if you wanted more of the farmer focused information, there is that webinar tomorrow evening as well that may be able to answer some of your questions further. So that poll's still running, but I think we're still collecting some responses. If you're happy to close that now, then Christian, that's fabulous, thank you. So today's speakers then, as I've mentioned, cannot count, but I'm very aware we do have 4. We've got Peter Mertens joining us. He is a professor at the Professor of Virology at the School of Veterinary Medicine and Science over in the University of Nottingham. He will be our first speaker, and he will be speaking about the midge and its life cycle. Then we have, we have Pia St. Dominique joining us from APHA, the veterinary advisor, and she will be informing us on the current testing and I'll talk about the operational side of the Bluetongue testing. Following that, we'll have Vanessa Swinson, who is from also APHA, the Veterinary Lead for Cattle group, and we will be covering the clinical signs for vet practitioners to look out for if and when that may occur. And our final speaker, last but by no means least, Joe, we've got Joe Henry, who's a practicing farm vet. He's also the chair of the Ruminant Health and Welfare Bluetongue Working Group and president of Sheep Veterinary Society. So following those very brief talks, so they're going to be 10 minutes per person, we will then open for a question and answer session where my colleague Mandy, who's head of animal health and welfare and a veterinary surgeon as well, will join the panel, and hopefully between us we'll be able to answer as many questions as possible. Just wanted to highlight to you resources that may be helpful for your clients. We do have the Ruminant Health and Welfare Resource Hub, so please do send your clients to that. There's a hub of information there, frequently asked questions, information on licensing, and that's where we will be populating any questions from today that are already not on there. There is also the Bluetongue virus hotline. The phone number is there. Please do send your farmers to that if they've got any concerns with licensing or movements or anything really. That will be manned over the Christmas and New Year period as well. There will be an answer phone message if they're not answered immediately. And as I've already mentioned, please complete the feedback form that will appear at the screen at the end of the webinar to help with future webinars, because we're hoping to schedule further ones in January. Watch this space for future invites. We'll try and give you a bit more notice than we have with this one, but when the needs must, we will respond, and those topics will be determined based on today's questions and demand from yourselves. There is a downloadable information leaflet on the side of this webinar, again useful for your farmers, some QR codes there with the information. And I just wanted to highlight as well for yourselves and any of your clients some additional support that will be available if anybody is concerned or anybody would like some more support. Apologies if I've missed any significant organisations there. There are a number, but there's just a few there for farmers and vets who may want to look at some additional support for yourselves and your clients. So that's enough from me. I am going to hand over to Peter Mertens. As I've mentioned, he's going to speak about the midge and its life cycle, how the virus replicates. So we're just going to do some screen sharing and screen swapping and hope that technology does not fail us.
What are we doing? Can you see that?
Yes, I can. You go for it, Peter. Thank you.
All right. It's disappeared from my screen. Hang on. No.
There we are. It's back.
I can't actually see my slides at the moment.
Would you rather I run it on my end, Peter? Would that be helpful?
I think it might be. Hang on. Give me a. Which button should I push for me to see it? Wait a moment. It's all right. Got it.
Excellent.
Right.
Thank you.
Right. So I'm going to give you a brief talk about Bluetongue, its lifestyle and infection. First of all, a bit of history. It's an emerging disease. It was first described in the 18th century. I'm not going to go through in detail everywhere it appeared, but it gradually spread around the globe, and it's basically between about 35 degrees south and 40 degrees north, right around the globe. It appeared a few times in Europe, in Cyprus and Greece, and BTV10 in Portugal and Spain, but these were very brief outbreaks and involved only a single serotype of the virus at each time. However, in 1998, things changed rather dramatically, and multiple serotypes started to appear in southern Europe. And it's possible that this has been linked to climate change, and the ecosystem in southern Europe appears to be different from what it was. Then in 2006, the first ever big outbreak in northern Europe. The virus had never been seen in northern Europe before then. Starting in the Netherlands in the Maastricht region, Bluetongue type 8, causing 25% mortality in sheep and infecting cattle and other ruminants. It spread to the UK in 2007, but was controlled entirely by vaccination. And the UK was the only country, the only region in the whole of Europe to control the virus that year. And then it re-emerged in France in 2015, possibly as a result of artificial insemination. And then we come on to the current situation, which is the second big outbreak, which started in, we believe, September, maybe August of this year. So a little bit about the virus. This image you see on the left here is a reconstruction of the virus by electron microscopy and X-ray crystallography, and it shows exactly where all the different proteins that make up the virus exist. Now, the most important one potentially is this protein in red, which is known as virus protein 2. It's the second largest protein, and there's 180 copies of it on the outer surface of the virus. There's another smaller protein, VP5, which has less serological significance. Now, the antibodies to VP2 are specific to each serotype. They tend to cross-react only poorly between different serotypes. And these antibodies can neutralize the virus and protect the host after infection or vaccination. So they are therefore very important in terms of vaccine development. They represent a target. VP2 represents the main target for vaccine development, and it's encoded by the second largest genome segment 2. So this is a comparison that Bortus Erasmus did in the early days in South Africa, looking at cross-protection studies in sheep. And he found that there were certain closer relationships between some serotypes. And the closer relationships are indicated by the heavier lines you might see, like between 20 and 17. And then less strong relationships between 4 and 11. And rather weak relationships, if any, by dotted lines, so between 14 and 10. I've marked the position of our two current interest European strains, 8 and 3, and you can see they belong to different groups. Now, the thing about this is that some of these virus serotypes group more closely together, and we've put them into a number of groups or clades, which we've given the letters A to F. And the largest one is this group A. So this is suggesting that those viruses within one group are more closely related to each other than to other groups. Now, what we've done, if you remember, genome segment 2 encodes for that important protein VP2 that determines virus serotype. And we've sequenced those genes from all of the different serotypes of virus. And then when we compare them and map them out on a circular tree like this, you can see that they're all reasonably well separated. But again, certain groups of viruses, certain serotypes of virus group more closely together. And these groups match exactly the groups of serological relationships that Bortus found in the sheep. And it really proves the point that this protein controls the virus serotype, and by cross-analysis of these sequences, we can not only identify the serotype of each virus, which is the basis of the current PCR tests that are used to identify the serotype, but also by sequence comparison, we can track the history of that particular strain by comparing it to previous strains. We can say where it's come from, and we can determine to some extent the movement of different viruses, and it gives us a better picture on the threats involved. So this is an important basis for a lot of the current testing. The antibodies produced can also be tested, but to test and identify serotype using antibodies is a slow process. It takes a couple of weeks. Using PCR, you can do it in a couple of hours, so it's much faster. Just want to do a little bit on the B2B replication transmission by insect vectors. These are the evil players in the whole thing, the midges. They will bite and transmit the virus. They are the insect vectors of Bluetongue virus and a number of other viruses like Schmallenberg and African horse sickness and AHD. So we've got Culicoides sonorensis up in the top right-hand corner. That's the North American vector, and Pirbright has a colony of these for doing work on vector transmission. Down in the bottom left, we've got Culicoides amicula, which is the main vector across the whole of Asia and Africa, so a really important vector. Culicoides obsoletus is again a colony at Pirbright from the UK. Not usually considered to be a major vector, but it depends on the virus strain maybe as well. And the Culicaris complex of insects is spread across the whole of Europe, and these are believed to include the vectors that are causing problems in Europe. This is the life cycle, starting from here, the infected host, bitten by an adult female Culicoides. They take a blood meal in order to get a protein source to lay eggs, and this then can result in infection, although infection of the midge is an inefficient process. Most of the feeding midges won't become infected. It depends on how much virus they take up. The period which they take for the virus to replicate in the insects and get to the salivary gland so it can be re-injected into a host, takes from 4 to 20 days, and maybe even longer, depending on ambient temperature. The virus, the insect, lives at ambient temperature, so the virus is much colder under cold days. All right, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. But going the other way, a single bite from a fully infected midge will reliably transmit the virus once the midge is fully infected, and they become infected for life. Now, this is an issue because in trying to use insecticides, porons perhaps on the sheep, it's got to be able to kill the insect before it even takes its first bite. And that maybe explains why insecticides tend to be considered as rather ineffective in controlling bluetongue virus and midge biting. So this is the important period, the intrinsic incubation period, which, as I say, can last several days. Now, during the replication of the virus is entirely dependent on an enzyme activity of an enzyme that is actually in the center of the virus core, and it's the RNA polymerase, and it makes the genome of the new progeny viruses. But as you can see, it has a clear temperature optima in the region from about 28 to about 38. And that's the sort of temperature that you might expect to find in a vertebrate host. So it's adapted to the vertebrate host. But insects are quite happy and will be active even at very low temperatures, down below 10 degrees. At 5 degrees, they're still active. But at that temperature, there is almost no activity from the polymerase. So the virus will take weeks maybe to progress so as it can spread to the salivary glands of the insect, and the insect may die of old age before it ever gets there. So in winter, cold temperatures not only reduce the number of insects by killing them off with frosts and so on, but also they reduce the ability of the virus to actually spread in the insect. So transmission in winter is very, very much curtailed. This is just a graph showing temperature occurrences, high temperature occurrences in Europe over the period from the 1850s to 2020. And as you can see, highlighted by the blue circle, there's been a recent surge in temperature. This is climate change. And if we look at the occurrence of bluetongue outbreaks, there were 2 in the 1950s and 1970s. Since 2000, since 1998, there have been over 20 separate incursions of 11 different serotypes into southern Europe, and many of these have remained. So the virus is now endemic in the region, and they've persisted. And I think there must be an obvious link here between climate change and the spread of this virus and potentially other viruses as well. This is how the viruses have moved into Europe. You can see there are 3 major routes, one through Turkey and across into Greece here. And some of these viruses have an eastern origin, they're an eastern genetic type. Then there's a group of viruses that have come up through Morocco and Libya this way. And these are African in origin. And then some viruses have also come through Morocco here into into Spain and Portugal. All right, and this is up to around 2005, but then in 2006, the unexpected happened. A strain of BT8 appeared directly in Northern Europe and spread essentially across all of the European countries. This was a massive outbreak, one of the largest ever recorded, and it caused really extensive fatalities, at least 25% fatalities in sheep, low-level fatalities in cattle, but also milk drop and all the clinical signs that you'll hear about, I think, from other speakers. This is just a point that somebody mentioned in one of the chats we've had recently about sand being blown from the Sahara across into Europe. And this is just a picture of that happening. So when midges are in flight, if the wind's in the right direction, they can be blown very significant distances. They can stay in the air for about 16 hours, it's been estimated. So at 10 miles an hour, well, do the maths yourself, it's quite a long way, and it's enough certainly to cross the channel and for us to get midges from the Netherlands. This is shows a set of programs that the Met Office developed really after the Chernobyl nuclear accident, asking the question, if you have particles in the air here one day, where will they be in 24 hours time? And they did this sort of analysis on the Netherlands during the BTV8 outbreak. And on one occasion, 4th, 5th of August, they showed that a plume of particles would spread from the Netherlands, where the outbreak was occurring, particularly across East Anglia. And about 2 weeks later, we had 2 cases of Bluetongue detected there in East Anglia. And that was really the start of the first time ever it had appeared in the UK. But luckily, it was controlled, the outbreak as such was controlled by vaccination from the DEFRA jab campaign, which was entirely successful and stopped the virus spreading through into 2008 after the winter, and in fact eradicated the virus. And as I said, the UK was the only country in Europe to eradicate the virus that year, down to that successful vaccination campaign. And it provided a buffer preventing further reappearances next year. So my final slide, just a little bit about vaccination. This is a representation of the cycle from the infected sheep, in this case they were all dead from BTV8, through inefficient transmission. Approximately 1 to 10% of biting insects would get infected through the insect vector, and then efficient transmission back the other way. Now with vaccination, one thing it does is helps to protect the host animal. It reduces the level of virus in the blood. And the insect must take up a certain amount of virus, at least estimated 1,000 infectious units per mil, must take up that sort of blood in order to become infected. All right, so viremia reduces that, but it also produces neutralizing antibodies, which actually can block the efficient transmission the other way. So vaccination blocks this cycle twice through each cycle, and is particularly effective at preventing onward transmission of the virus to other animals. And that's why I think vaccination is the only route to go if we had one. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening. And I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Peter. So just while we're changing screens over to Pia, we have had a question which you have touched on, but Ian did email us earlier today, and I did say join the call and ask the question, and he has, so thank you, Ian, for that. If adult midges don't live for more than 30 days, that the virus is not vertically transmitted from female midge to offspring, and that ruminants tend to remain virus positive for no more than 60 days, how does the virus overwinter?
Well, that's an exceedingly good question, and there's at least 2 clear mechanisms. One of them, in pregnant animals, the virus can be transmitted vertically to the fetus, and this, in the early stages, can cause abortion or deformed offspring. But the animals, when born, can be infectious. That point at which they're born, the birthing materials and the animals themselves can be infectious. So a feeding midge on the animal may potentially transmit the virus, but also the birthing materials, if ingested with straw or something by another naive cow or sheep, they can be infected by an oral route. So that's one possibility. The other one, which I think was really important in France, when the virus re-emerged after it had been eradicated, it was eradicated in 2010, it re-emerged in 2015, and it hadn't evolved during that period. I do have a slide which I could show, but the point is it was frozen during that period, literally, and we think it was in semen, and it was reintroduced as part of artificial insemination. So the virus can get into the testes, which are an immunoprivileged site, and it tends not to be cleared. So this is a risk. Semen in post-infected rams and bulls really needs to be tested to make sure it's free of virus.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ian, for asking that question. Okay, so in the interest of time, we'll hand over to Pia. So Pia works at APHA. Over to you, Pia. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Can I check with you that you can see my screen?
Yes, we
Perfect,
can.
thank you. Right. Apologies. Yep, there we are. Good afternoon. As I said, I'm work for APHA. I'm a veterinary advisor, even though that at present I'm a veterinary head of the Outbreak central cells. So mainly dealing on the operation regarding the licensing, surveillance, and tracings. I've been asked to provide a brief update on the situation of the confirmed cases that have been happening so far, and also to provide a brief description of surveillance and licensing activities. I've started with this slide on the epidemiology of Bluetongue, and I say it's not my intention to go through the epidemiology itself. I'm more on the operational side, but I just wanted to perhaps highlight here some of the two aspects. One is about the susceptible animals to Bluetongue, and I'm here just in terms of the livestock side of things. We are considering the susceptible livestock, the mainly sheep, cattle, and goats, but also camelids and deers. But of course, there are other non-livestock susceptible animals as well. The severity, as we will see later on, the severity of clinical signs may vary between species, breed, and serotype. And not all infected ruminants will show clinical signs or pathological signs. That has been quite evident in these confirmed cases, where quite a number of them did not have any clinical signs prior to being confirmed positive to Bluetongue. But I think the important here I wanted to highlight, and that has a bearing into the activities regarding the surveillance and some of the licensing conditions, is that the disease is associated with the, as has been mentioned before, on the insect vector, on the vector, which is the midges, in which the virus replicates and is implicated in the transmission. So I think the mainly, so it's kind of setting the picture, setting the situations, the update. So we had a BTV 3 was first confirmed on one bovine animal, that was a cow, on the 10th of November this year. And that was identified as part of the ongoing annual Bluetongue survey program that is happening in certain types, on certain areas of the country because of their are at risk of some plume coming from the continent. And so that was the first confirmed case we had, and the latest one we had it was on the 17th of December, and that was on a ship on a holding in what we call the Sandwich Bay area in the what we call the temporary control zone of the northeast of Kent, and that was the identification of that ship was following a active surveillance as opposed to the annual Bluetongue routine surveillance that we had. As in total, as of today, which is the 19th of December, we have had 23 confirmed infected animals, of which 21 cattle and 2 sheep. Those are residing on 9 different premises, and they were in 2 counties. The majority, so 8 of those premises are in the Kent area and 1 in Norfolk. These 20, it's important to remind ourselves that these 23 confirmed cases are considered isolated cases. There is currently still no evidence that Bluetongue virus is circulating in Great Britain, and therefore surveillance is ongoing. In all these cases, in all the positive cases where there has been the confirmation of infection, these animals have been humanly culled to minimize the risk of on-course transmission. So the culling of the animal has only been at the individual confirmed cases. Just a kind of reminder of where we are, what are the disease control objectives. So the primary objective, having said that we have all these 20 odd isolated cases, is to establish really whether or not virus is circulated in the midge population. That's the main objective, or the surveillance activity that is happening on the temporary control zone. I'm going to talk a moment in a temporary control zone, but that's the main objective, to establish whether or not virus is circulating in the midge population. But also a second objective is to detect and disclose infection. So the primary aim is to limit the spread of infection through the proportionate and evidence-based control measures. which, as everybody I'm sure is aware, is about to protect the public health and safety, eradicate the disease and regain disease-free status, safeguard the health and safety of those involved in controlling the outbreak, minimizing the burden of the taxpayer and public, as well as the economic impact on the agricultural industry. And at the end of the day, it's also about balancing the burdens of control against the benefits of eradicating of Bluetongue. I said something about the temporary control zones. Well, we had the first case in the around the Kent area, where we call it the BTD 2023-01. And in order in originally temporary control zone was established around this first case, where we call it the index case, to investigate if there was a circulation of Bluetongue infection beyond this case. The original Kent temporary control zone was established as a 10-kilometer radius zone from the location of the premises of the location of the cow. Just kind of a reminder that we are the temporary control zones are set as the appropriate size to contain disease, and is part of it's informed. The size of the temporary control zone is informed by a number of factors, but it's mainly about allow veterinary investigations to be carried out. The important thing, and has a bearing in terms of the license, is that no susceptible animals, carcasses, ovens, embryos, or semen are permitted to move to or from any premises within the zone, except under license issued by a veterinary inspector. So since there was put in place of this original temporary control zone around the primary of the index case, BTD 2023-01, there's been a disclosure of further cases I have mentioned before through this active surveillance. Due to the location of these different confirmed cases, the original Kent temporary control zone has been extended to cover a larger area. Following again routine surveillance on the Norfolk premises, 2 further cases of Bluetongue in cattle were identified in a farm in Norfolk, and again another temporary control zone, 10-kilometer one, was declared around this premises on the 8th of December. Here is a map. I'm sure most of you are aware of, and that map is on the Gov.uk website. We've got the 2 temporary control zones. The first one is the one on the south, again the Kent area, which is, as I said, was originally 10 kilometers around. Then it was extended to another 10 kilometers around the Sandwich Bay area, and it was fully extended. That was near Cantley, Broadland. Sorry, that was near Canterbury, Kent. And then we had the second temporary control zone that was established around these 2, around the premises where we found these 2 other positive cattle around Broadland, Norfolk. So that's in terms of the location and temporary control zones. So as I mentioned, what we are doing on this temporary control zone is surveillance, which the aim is mainly to inform the potential circulation of virus. But again, also on the side as well, or part important to it, is to identify undetected or infected animals that identify undetected animals, so that disease can be removed and there's no further onward spread, and then also understand the level of infection. The third aim will be to reduce or delay the risk of disease spread in 2024 when the vector activity is increased. So what we are doing there is actually we are visiting all premises within the temperature control zones. So right now we've got 2 temperature control zones. We started with the Kent one, and then we have the Norfolk one. So we are visiting all premises within the temperature control zones, and we are carrying out a clinical inspection and blood sampling of all susceptible stock in all those premises. As you are aware, there's we started with a smaller temperature controls, which has been extended, and now we have a second temperature control that involves quite a large volume or large number of premises and a large number of animals, and therefore we are trying to prioritize, and we've been prioritizing those visits, those surveillance visits, in zones around the areas where infected animals have been found. So really in them, some of the initial 0 to 3 kilometers, and then so forth, and then around the coastal areas. But we also have been focusing or prioritizing visits on the large cattle premises. So Again, in terms of the surveillance visits, those visits have been undertaken by a veterinary surgeon. Originally started with APHA staff, and then now there are APHA staff as well as VDPs, and because they include a lot of blood sampling. Also, in some cases, we have some technical staff depending on the size of the farm. Like any other visit, biosecurity is undertaken prior to entering any farm. And as I said, clinical inspection is taken of all stock, and we are asking questions of production and examination of all records in those premises. I mentioned that we are sampling all susceptible stock, but just for awareness that there's some ongoing discussion happening right now about there is an age limit. We're trying to balance the operational some operational arguments and welfare arguments in terms of perhaps limit the number of or the age of the animals that needs to be sampled. For instance, we are aware, of course, of the some of these early young lambs, and maybe probably starting out with some of these early newborn lambs. So there's ongoing discussions, likely to be an age limit to when we will be starting to do sampling of those animals. Again, they are sampling bloods, as we mentioned, there were bloods taken, and we're looking for PCR and serology. We are mainly focusing on the animals, so the premises that are within the temperature control zones, but we are all finding that there are some killing premises, and also there are some temporary land association parcels that are creating some issues in terms of determining exactly the number of premises or the number of the groups of animals within the temperature control zones. We are aware of the importance of the in all premises have the facilities that are facilities available for the efficient bleed of those animals. So, as I said earlier on, we have two temperature control zones. We started with the Kent one, and which then was expanded. And just to give you some figures, I mean, it's difficult to give some figures because I think those are evolving. And even though I can quote some premises, but actually the premises then for not all of them have at one time a visit have the livestock that have livestock, or even though that some of them had livestock in different parcels of land. So just to give you some figures, we have roughly about 500 premises with susceptible stock within the Kent temperature control zone, which equates roughly around 22,000 odd animals. In the Norfolk temperature control zone, there was about 350 premises with susceptible stock, which equates roughly about 23,000 animals. So as you see, quite a large volume of premises of animals. As I said earlier on, we've been prioritizing some of these large premises and some of these premises that are within closer to the location of the infected animals. And so we have already within the Kent temperature control zone done most of the work already under the 0 to 5 kilometers, and then from there we just keep going with the 5 to 10. The same thing with the second part of the Kent area, which is the Sandwich Bay area. I've done majority of the 0 to 5. There's still work to be done on the 5 to 10. We have started as soon as the temperature control zone for the Norfolk established. We started with the 0 to 3 kilometers, and then we are again then progressing with the rest. Just one thing that I just put it here is that it's important that we are, as I said, we are finding that that even though there are some premises that we know the number of premises within our systems, we are finding that there are some pieces of land and there are groups of animals that are maybe grazing or maybe located in some other areas. So it's important that we I'm aware this is mainly for vets, that if you can perhaps go with the clients and encourage very strongly that all those pieces of land are really correctly registered if they are using temporary use land of buildings. And as I said, we are progressing through these clinicals, through sampling, through these two temperature control zones. But I think it's important to establish here that we're going to have a slight pause in terms of the effort that we are carrying out, and that effort is very much limited with the resources available and the lab capacity. But I think it's important that from the 23rd of December to the 1st of January inclusive, the lab at the Purbright Institute and National Reference Lab will be closed for all testing except for urgent diagnostic testing, which will be, and also report case investigations. Having touched about the very quickly, having touched about the surveillance, maybe I would like to touch on the license, and that has to do with the movement control. So any animal movements out of the temporary control zone are not allowed until we have a better assessment of the situations. Movements into or within the zone are only allowed under license. There's been from the beginning a derogation from restrictions have been made to allow the movement of dairy cattle for milking, but all other movements are require a license. There are already from the beginning. There's already quite a number of movements that do have a license, and we have. I'm just going to go in a moment very quickly through them, but it's important for everybody to understand that although a license may be available, it may still not be the request of the movement may not still be approved if the risk associated with that individual request is too high. So we may have a license, but it doesn't necessarily that license would be approved. But we are in any case. I'm going to go in a moment of the licenses that are that we have available. But in any case, we encourage all the farmers, all the livestock keepers, to apply for a license as soon as possible. Even though that we may not have a license, at least we know what are the requests being made. But I think all the time we are complex and high risk movements will need extra time to process. So we're asking for so it's a plea from us to give us for a license at least 5 days before the intended move. So very quickly, maybe just the type of moves that are allowed for live animals, including the welfare. So it's basically of live animals within the zone. So basically of live animals outside of the zone into or the in the zone. When I said here zone, that will be the temporary control zone. There's also of live animals between premises and the Bluetongue restrictions inside or outside of the zone, excluding movements out of the zone, and also of live animals from an unrestricted premises outside the temporary control zone to a premises and the Bluetongue restrictions. So those are the live animals allowed, live movements allowed. In terms of the moves for slaughter, we have movements for premises in the temporary control zone to a slaughterhouse within the temporary control zone, a premises within the zone to a designated zone, slaughterhouse outside of temporary control zone. We have also from the market within to a slaughterhouse within the temporary control zone, and also from Bluetongue restrictions to a premises to a designated slaughterhouse for slaughter. Again, just to give you maybe just some figures, roughly, we had so far about 176 applications received. Since we started with the restrictions, and of those, about 113 were for slaughter and 54 for welfare reasons. Of those, about 128 have been approved and only 3 rejected. In terms of the type of movements that are not allowed for live animals, are the movements of animals for slaughter from premises within the zone to undesignated abattoir outside of the zone. As I said, we have had now a number of abattoirs that have been designated outside the zone, and we have a license for that, but there is not a license for undesignated abattoirs. And also, there are no movement, not for the time being, there are not movements of live animals outside of the temporary control zone where the origin is within the zone and the destination is outside of the zone. However, there are currently discussions to allow the move of live animals from premises inside of the temporary control zone to outside of the temporary control for welfare reasons under a license. So as I said, there are some discussions, and we hope to have a very soon a license for that welfare moves. It's still to be decided, and that's why I wouldn't want to say much about it right now, but they are likely to involve some pre-movement and post-movement testing in addition to the usual Bluetongue, the normal Bluetongue conditions and other movement license conditions. So I think for that one, we are hoping to see very soon some of that license for welfare reasons. And that's why, again, I mentioned earlier, but I think we are very much encouraging everybody to apply for a license for welfare reasons, and that will give us an indication of not only the volume, but actually of the reasons, and will help us to push forward some of these license and some of the approving of those licenses. So that's for me in terms of surveillance and licensing. And again, if there is just that's last slide, just to always remind ourselves that we suspect Bluetongue disease, how to go about notifying APHA. Thank you.
Thank you, Pia. So just while we swap over to Vanessa, we've got quite a few questions in, but one that's been highlighted here. So it's worth highlighting that the UK has been doing Bluetongue surveillance for many years. Firstly, what Pia, you've explained of annual surveillance across counties in the south and east of England, identified each year by the meteorological models. And secondly, post-import testing of all live susceptible animals from high-risk countries. And thirdly, reported cases of clinical cases and PM. So I think that's more of a statement than a question, really. So I think just, yeah, someone who's in the know, most definitely there. But worth highlighting. Do you agree, Pia? Yeah, okay.
Definitely.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, so it's not the first year we found. We've looked for several years. This year's the first we found it, so it's not something that's been grumbling for years that we've effectively not found. Okay. In the interest of time, we'll move on to Vanessa, and then we'll get the more questions at the end. So over to you, Vanessa. Thank you. Vanessa is veterinary lead for the cattle group, and we'll talk about the Bluetongue clinical signs. Thank you, Vanessa.
Thanks, Neris. Is my screen showing okay?
You just need to go to presenter mode. Just go to presenter mode. It's currently, yeah, just go to slideshow.
Oops.
Yeah, just go to
beginner. Okay.
There we go. Yeah, thank
right.
you.
Okay, thank you there, I think. So I just wanted to say that these slides are a combination of images from APHA colleagues and Virology in the Netherlands, ANSYS in France, and some other images that BCA got from the Netherlands as well. So I think it's helpful just to look at the underlying mechanisms of the clinical signs. So after our incubation period, we've got the virus replication and then damage caused to the lining of the blood vessels. So this results in hemorrhage, which we'll see in the clinical signs, ischemia, which often then is in some of the chronic clinical signs you may see a few days after the initial signs, inflammation, edema. And often the lesions are seen in areas that are subject to mechanical damage or abrasion, so particularly feet and mouth, and then the teats as well for cattle. So start with sheep. So the most severe clinical signs and highest rate of clinical signs seen is in sheep. So you can expect pyrexia up to 42 degrees. Salivation, depression, dyspnea and panting. Initially a clear nasal discharge, but then often becomes mucopurulent and you get some crusting around the nose, hyperemia, as you can see there, around the eyes and nose on the mucous membranes, and then progressing to edema. So some images here of edema. So sheep, it's more obvious, particularly edema are more extreme. So seeing swelling of the nose, as you can see in those two lower images, congestion of the mucous membranes, and some ulceration there around the tooth in that top right image. And in some cases, progression to cyanosis of the tongue and mouth later in the course of the disease. Another common lesion is in the feet, so hyperemia of the coronary band, as in the bottom right there, might be the first sign seen, which then can progress to a more severe coronitis and sort of, as you can see there, discomfort and lameness from coronitis and sort of shifting of weight from one foot to another. And the Netherlands reports that in some cases there was lameness initially, and then there seemed to be a bit of an improvement, but then after a few days you can get more of a secondary coronitis and infection from the ischemia that was there to start with. And then the last sort of group of clinical signs is the reproductive signs and other more unusual signs. So I guess abortion isn't very specific for Bluetongue, but could be seen. And also stillbirths and lambs that are born weak. We do see with these viruses and with some other gestational virus infections, congenital defects, particularly of the central nervous system. So that is particularly something to look out for, which may be more pertinent next year, later on in next year, to be looking out for this kind of thing. Emaciation sort of later in the disease process, and ill thrift, and then at the bottom left there, issues with some wool loss, patches of alopecia. So then going on to cattle, so generally the experience of Netherlands and France and our experience in 2007, 2008 is that the signs are less severe in cattle than they are in sheep. So still you would get possibly pyrexia, but maybe not quite as high as sheep. Salivation, drooling, maybe more subtle conjunctivitis and tear staining below the eye. But we do, as Peter and Pierre have mentioned, is quite a lot of subclinical cases where when they're tested, they're positive, but we haven't actually seen much clinical signs. Mouth and muzzle lesions, from what I've seen from other countries, these lesions that you can see there on the nose are quite common. So it's that sort of reddening around the nares and a bit of crusting. Sometimes if it's on the top of the nose in the pink area above the nose, it can look a bit like photosensitization. You can see there more of an extreme inflammation around the nose in the middle there, and then ulceration and inflammation in the mouth on the left. Here's a range of different images of the edema of the lower limb, and again coronitis, quite a severe case at the top right there, but probably just a more subtle edema, swelling around the coronary band might be seen in cattle. And then, excuse me, as for sheep, chronic lameness, sometimes secondary infections a few days further on. And then again, sort of going through the same range of signs as for sheep, so abortions, congenital defects, brain lesions. That's an example of a case from 2008. And the congenital brain lesions are more commonly seen for Bluetongue strain 8 in cattle than they are for sheep, but can be seen in other species. Teat lesions, these sort of just reddening of the teats, probably is the most common, but it can be more severe, sort of be with scabs and severe inflammation later on, and possibly vulval lesions. The Netherlands have reported, because they've been doing surveillance of quite a lot of herds and flocks over a 6-week period, that they did notice quite a lot of milk drop across a lot of the dairy herds in the Netherlands, and also fertility issues. So just a mention of goats as well. The goats seem to be, from what we've heard, is sort of milder clinical signs than sheep and cattle. So it would be in severity sheep the most, then cattle, then goats generally. So the signs seen would be maybe a mild pyrexia, edema of the lips, which you can see in the top right image there, and in sort of post-mortem, maybe just a very subtle edema. You can see that the tissues there are quite shiny on the post-mortem sample there, and mild ocular nasal discharges and ulceration. So post-mortem findings for anybody that's doing on-farm post-mortems, so ulceration and inflammation on the tongue there, on the palate, on the dental pad, and then possibly hemorrhages throughout, small hemorrhages throughout the carcass, but they're the heart and heart base is quite a common place to get them. Increased pericardial fluid, as you can see on the bottom right there, and then this sort of edema and sort of interlobular edema and sort of heaviness of the lungs from from the edema, enlarged lymph nodes. And just a quick mention of differential diagnosis. So I'm just mentioning this because Rudolph as lead for the small ruminant group and myself and veterinary investigation officers at the various sites were happy to discuss cases that have been report cases of bluetongue and been negated, and we're happy to help you investigate those and support some testing generally. So you know, if you get in touch with us or your local centre if you want to discuss those following negation, because it just all helps build the evidence base for not just for bluetongue itself, but for what other diseases can look like bluetongue. And just some acknowledgements there. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you, Vanessa. So on to Joe, last by no means least. So Joe, do you want to move on and then we'll do questions right at the end? We've got a few, but they're all fairly similar and we'll bring another speaker. So if you go on ahead, Joe. Joe's a farm vet up in the north, up in Northumbria, and we'll be covering sort of the role of the vet in this when it gets to, or if it gets to farm level. So there we go, over to you, Joe.
Great, can you guys see that?
Yeah, just need to put it into presentation mode. Yeah, that's it, brilliant.
Perfect. Great,
thanks
very much, Dennis, and everyone for listening. Yeah, I'm a beef and sheep practicing vet based in Northumberland. This year president of the Sheep Vet Society, and have been involved in quite a lot of discussions in this. So really, I think the feedback we getting from the Dutch and the French outbreak is things that the farmers will have quite a few questions for you guys as the vets. They'll be wanting to know how to protect their animals. They'll be wanting to know if they get sick, what treatments to give, and things like, how are their herds and flocks protected afterwards from an immunity point of view. So I'll cover some of those just now quite quickly. I think the big, huge thing really is that really the only way out of this protection wise and to stop the outbreak is to get vaccination, and to get some inactivated or genetically modified vaccination is basically what we need to get out of this. It worked so effectively last time in the UK. There was a concern that people wouldn't do it again because they didn't see the disease, but certainly the experience that they've had on the continent, I very much think, and certainly some of our sheep farmers are already asking about trying to get vaccine. As Peter's already said, there's no cross protection from the Bluetongue 8 vaccine that we had before, so it's back to the pharmaceuticals to develop one really, and there's a fair bit of pressure going onto that. But yeah, that's sort of the only really effective one. Obviously, the cold weather at the moment is protecting us. Again, as Peter said, once it gets below 12-15 degrees, the virus sort of isn't able to replicate fully in the midge. And so that's why at the minute we're thinking that the cases that are occurring are from blown in midges. It's not actually circulating in the UK in Kent or Norfolk. And then but obviously next summer it's going to warm up, and I think the chances are they're going to have more bluetongue in the continent, and that will blow over. And if it blows over before it gets cool, like we've been very fortunate this time, it's likely to start circulating over here. However, obviously buying in policy, especially buying in pregnant animals and things like that, if you buy in a viremic animal, then you can infect your area, and that's something to be considered when buying animals in. The Dutch are quite keen on housing of animals, but this is not just sticking them in a shed. It's not going to be practical for all animals on a farm, because we're talking extended periods of time. It could be from midsummer till next December. But to put it in the sheds, midge-proof netting, there's a set size that the mesh has to be, sort of midges getting in, preferably impregnated with insecticide, and then the use of fans in those sheds to keep airflow going. Probably only practical really for the high value animals, but things like rams and stuff like that, because it has been shown that sometimes the rams, they're the high value ones anyway, but and then the virus can actually survive longer in their sperm and testes, as Peter was saying. Practically, things like moving the muck heaps away from the steading. Midges love breeding in muck heaps, and that's just one way of slightly reducing it. Again, insecticides, in terms of slightly inducing it, a lot of the insecticides, pyrethroids, etc., have evidence in vitro, that if they put a drop in the petri dish and they put the midges in there and they keep putting midges in there, they will die for quite long. But in terms of actually proven in the field, not much evidence at all. And again, on the continent, they haven't found that very helpful. The immunity afterwards, it appears that there's only a small sort of proportion of sheep anyway that are subclinically affected and so have antibodies even though they didn't have disease. But once they've had antibodies, that will provide some protection, but obviously not as much as the vaccination. Treatment protocols, it's not like great news, to be honest. And hopefully this isn't going to be well, it certainly hasn't happened yet, because we've not had any clinical cases, and hopefully it won't happen until next summer at the earliest, or late spring. But and we may even have a vaccine, but that's going to be if everything comes into line, which is pretty tricky. But yeah, so treatments, there's no magic treatment this makes your sheep better. As Vanessa's saying, there's a lot of problems with edema and inflammation in the lungs and airwaves and etc. Stopping them breathing. So a shot of steroids in the acute phases, the Dutch found quite helpful. The Dutch tried everything because this has been really quite severe for them. This is in terms of the diagnosis and stuff. Farms are going out and finding 25% of their sheep seriously ill, sort of on day one, and they've used loads of different treatments, and they haven't found very much works very well, which is why euthanasia should definitely come up with the decision tree, and they're saying things like if the sheep haven't been eaten for more than 24 hours, or if they've been down for more than 24 hours, without, obviously, if they can stand supported for a bit, that might show they're not quite as severely affected. But some of these severely affected ones then might respond a little bit, and then all their cleats fall off, at a later date, or they have arthritis developing in their carpal joints and things like that. So, unfortunately, euthanasia is, protecting the sheep's welfare. We've got to be realistic with this. Other than that, it's just a supportive treatment. The electrolytes, keeping the hydration up, propylene glycol, for energy and stuff for these ones that aren't eating and drinking very well. Just pretty sort of low-grade antibiotics to try and stop the secondary infections, because the lining of their guts are sloughing and things like that to allow bacteria into the bloodstream. So that's, I know we don't like to give antibiotics when there's not active infection, but there will be infection, as it were, and obviously there often is bacterial infection concurrently once you've got this level of pathology in the animals, especially the sheep. The non-steroidals is a slightly tricky one because a lot of these animals have pretty severe kidney damage and or dehydrated. So that's one of the reasons that if your kidneys are pretty knacked and you're dehydrated, then the non-steroidals aren't going to do you any favors. So that's up to you as the vets to make a judgment as to how hydrated they are, and potentially high value animals you do some kidney parameters. But so yeah, that's not by any means definitely going to help, but sort of a one-off shot if you think they're pretty well hydrated. And then actually they've been using paracetamol a fair bit, of have to be under cascade, obviously. There is paracetamol license for pigs, so it's still food producing animals, as a painkiller, analgesic and antipyretic, brings the temperature down. The withdrawal time in pigs, I think, is 1 day or 0 days, but would be a standard one-off license of 28 days sort of minimum. And we may, we've got plenty of time hopefully before we'll have to start thinking about treatment. And these are all, it's all pretty new, in Holland. It's only been going on since 6th of September or something. And then really the sort of last bit, that role of us, is for helping with diagnosis, obviously, in terms of the actually where it is, and helping APHA and that sort of thing. I think at the moment, for those in the areas, it's these welfare assessments, you know, with sheep being stuck. The movement restrictions obviously are very tight to try and protect the rest of the country, but you know, if you've got sheep coming up to lambing and you need to get them shifted because there's no grass or there's no shelter where they are, you know, those sort of welfare assessments by you, the vets, you know, and then helping your farmers, your clients write the licenses, to get that sort of, that it's important enough for the sheep to be moving, or the cattle. And obviously sort of general advice about the things we've talked about how to try and reduce the chance of the midges biting. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the foot and mouth outbreak in 2001, and you know, a lot of our time was talking to farmers and being someone to listen. You know, a lot of farmers will be under severe moral distress. Really, they can see their animals are suffering, either due to sort of restrictions in movement or actual disease, and it's pretty hard on them. And it's just to bear in mind that, you know, when our clients are under pressure, it's even more important things like reporting negative results that they might, you know, it's not as exciting as it were, but it's absolutely crucial to, you know, that farmer, that family to know, you know, that things are actually, you know, not as bad as they hoped, and to make sure you return phone calls and things like that. And then I think actually, you know, looking at those slides that Pia put out, surveillance, you know, might well become more widespread if we get more, which we'll probably will do next summertime. You know, I think, and like for the movements out of the TZZs, they'll likely be pre and post movement bloods and things like that. So in terms of getting up to speed on your bleeding sheep and bleeding cows, it's probably not a bad chance. You know, we've got a few months hopefully to get good at that. Right, so yeah, conscious, I just wanted to be quite quick. You've been sitting down a fair bit, so we'll just have some questions now.
Excellent, thank you, Joe. You've brought us back onto time from my poor chairing, but we had such interesting content. There was no way I couldn't cut across. So we have several questions. One, just so farmers like to feel like they're doing something. What about things such as garlic spray that are intended to repel insects? Are they at all useful? Anybody want to? Joe, do you want to say something about that? Can anyone answer that question?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not aware of any evidence that the garlic sprays are useful against midges, but I think anecdotally they certainly help against other biting insects. I think they might be part of, you know, general measures, but I don't think they're going to be, you know, 100%. That's my opinion on the garlic licks.
Okay. Anyone else want to jump in on that, or shall I move on? Oh, Mandy, yeah.
Yeah, I'd just like to make a comment that in the last Bluetongue outbreak in 2007, there was a lot of advertising for product that was very limited in the evidence. And I think we've got to be very careful that we don't ask farmers to do things that are going to cost them money when times are tough. So there is extremely little evidence, if any, of any efficacy of those sorts of products. There are a number of insecticides that pharmaceutical companies have, and they do have a lot of technical information. If you want to get that, no, not many of them are licensed, but there is some background information that they would have on that. But I think we've got to be very cautious about going liberally applying insecticide on large numbers of animals in a concentrated region from an environmental point of view.
Absolutely, thank you, Mandy. So one that came in for Vanessa, just we were crossing over Vanessa, so I will ask you this. So how long would you expect clinical signs to last for? On the EXD44, which may mean something to you guys, doesn't to me, we are saying 56 days. Where has this come from?
I guess it's probably based from the experience from 2007, 2008. I think there's been a whole spectrum with BTV3 in the Netherlands, from just a slight spike in temperature, which is, just for maybe 48 hours, and a little milk drop in dairy cows, up to, some sheep that have the initial clinical signs, and then as I've said, then they get a second wave of secondary issues. So, that then can go on for, 2 or 3 weeks. And I think this is where, as Joe's intimated, it's the difficulty in deciding the welfare of euthanasia in those cases, whether you're better off to do it earlier on, but then obviously people are trying to save animals, and if they show a slight improvement, they might think it's worth persevering, but then in some of the cases the Netherlands have found they've then regressed a few days later.
Okay, thank you. A couple for Pia coming in now. So how much surveillance or testing has been done between those two areas, so between the Kent and the Norfolk, so such as Essex and Suffolk?
Shall I answer that, Pia?
Well, sorry, yeah, he was trying to locate my mouse.
The annual Bluetongue survey that was mentioned earlier is in all of the counties from on the northeast extreme, the top of Norfolk, then down to all down the coast, covering Essex, Kent, and then across through Dorset and down into Devon. And that is based on an epidemiological assessment of how many herds need sampling per county, depending on the size of the county. So there will have been other farms will have been sampled in between the cases in Norfolk and the cases in Kent, and also further west of Kent as well. There will have been farms sampled all along, and including the Isle of Wight as well.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. I think this might be for Pia. Well, were all 23 cases viremic PCR positive?
My understanding is that 23 were PCR positive, yes.
Right, okay, thank you. So, sorry, I'm just trying to scroll through these. It's great that we've got so many questions coming in. So is there any contingency for licenses to move calves, as this example, for welfare reasons outside of the zone? We have dairies without capacity to house beef cross calves, and I'm concerned if licenses are not available, and then due to lack of housing, we may be nearing a situation where calves are euthanized as newborns, which is not desirable for any party involved. I'm not sure who wants to tackle that one.
I think it's one of mine, isn't it? I think it's as I mentioned before, right now there are ongoing discussion, and we hope to have very shortly a license available for the move on the welfare grounds, and that could be considered one of the reasons for welfare grounds. So yes, there can be a consideration of the movements of calves when there is a shortage of space or a shortage of available feed. But obviously that will have to be they will have to be applying they will have to apply, and there will be certain conditions attached to that granting that license. As I said, I cannot really say right now what will be the criteria for the conditions for the license, but in principle, the answer they should. Yep, go ahead, Mandy.
No, I was trying to signal to Neris that I'd come in afterwards. I think the advice that we've been forwarded by DEFRA is if you think that you are going to be in that situation, please apply for the license, even though it's not yet available. DEFRA need to understand how many animals are in that situation, and if they get those licenses in, welfare is their priority. They do not want to see animals euthanized for welfare issues. So what you can do to help actually is encourage your clients to put in those licenses and give as much information about the welfare compromises that are being experienced. So housing is absolutely key, but lack of feed, labour, whether the conditions are, inhospitable, very muddy, very wet, very boggy, all those things. The stronger the case, the better, really, because they will be assessed individually, and the more weight you can give to it, and that is something that you can really help your farmers do.
Okay, and the way to signpost vets and farmers to these licenses, would you advise going through the Ruminant Health and Welfare Bluetongue hub, Mandy?
Well, the licenses are all available on the government website primarily, but we have signposted them through the Ruminant Health and Welfare, and there's a table of licenses that are available on the Ruminant Health and Welfare website. We've put in a table, whether it's a move within the temporary control zone or out, and that will be updated as soon as we know that DEFRA have made that license available. So if there is a license that's made available for moves outside the TCZ, that will go on to Ruminant Health and Welfare, and we're geared up, not on bank holidays, but we're geared up on all other days to get that message out to vets and farmers. So if you want to do that, it's worth signing up to the AHDB links as well. But we will be putting that out through texts and emails and onto Ruminant Health and Welfare.
Can I just one comment? I would like to emphasize very much that I think APHA operations, we are very much, we endeavor very much to supply and to work and collaborate with the industry and with the farmers and the vets to make sure that there is a smooth running and a smooth approval of those urgent requests. I think they are the top of our priorities. And I think they are pick up the phone. I know this. We are asking for the licenses to be submitted via a mailbox, but we are always there to pick up the phone. The only thing we're asking from our point is just don't wait till it's too late. Really, as much in advance as possible, and we are. If there's a need to have a conversation, more than welcome to have that conversation. We are going to be shortly producing a checklist, because I think one of the things that needs to happen is that there is an application form, and sometimes we need to go back to the person the applicant to gather more information. So the more information they know in advance of what we are going to be asking, then that process is going to be smoother. So I think definitely something from our side that we like very much to do so. But it says welfare is at the top of priorities, and we will endeavour to process them as quickly as possible. And just to be aware that there is a risk assessment. There's an assessment that we need to do. But I think that there is, as soon as the days will go through, they will be probably smoother.
I think it's also important to say that trading standards are aware of the issues and are working with the farmers. So they're not there to prosecute and make things harder. So, but early discussions with them is very useful.
Excellent, thank you. So surveillance seems very labour intensive. Would you aim to maintain this level of sampling if disease is found to be more widespread than the current TCZs? I think, Pia, that's one for you. I'll try and find some for others to give you a break after this one.
Obviously, we are, as I said, currently we are we have to be mindful of the objective of the surveillance, and is about establishing circulation and discovering undetected infection. So if the strategy changes, then we'll have to adapt that surveillance and the surveillance activities. So I think it's that always to be mindful that it's evolving. And therefore there may be some changes on the surveillance strategy, and therefore on the surveillance activities. Right now, yes, it's quite labor intensive, but I think we are actually pushing more. There are more resources available to us in terms of people, vets and technical staff, but also I think in terms of the laboratory capacity. So we are increasing our resources, and we are increasing that capability for delivering those surveillance visits.
Okay, thank you. Peter, one for yourself. Well, I think it might be for you, Peter. What role do wild deer play as a reservoir for BTV, or as a mode of spread of infection, as deer may be moving in and out of the TCZ?
As far as we know, deer can become infected. There isn't a lot of information on how the virus affects British species of deer. They were largely ignored, I have to say, during the outbreak in 2007, and the vaccination program worked very effectively. So it suggests that they're not of fundamental importance in spread of the virus in the UK. But beyond that, I mean, because wild deer would be so difficult to sample and get any sort of meaningful information on, it's really not practical to go out and try and test them and cull them if they're infected and so on. So I think it's an entirely pragmatic approach. We can't do much about it, so we don't. And so far, that has not come back to bite us.
Okay, and while we've got you, Peter, could you repeat why insecticides have limited effect, please?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say they will have no effect. If for example, there's a some screening on a building that's a mesh and that's treated with insecticide, then that will have an effect on trying to prevent insects entering the building. But the problem is that the efficiency of transmission, because the virus gets into the saliva of the insect, the first thing the insect does when it makes a hole, if you like, in the host, is inject saliva to stop clotting, and the virus goes in first thing. And so a single bite from an insect, even if it's disturbed, is enough to reliably transmit the virus. Now, if you're going to use a pour-on insecticide on the animal, it's got to be able to kill the animal between it landing and taking a bite. So it's got to be very, very fast. And most insecticides just aren't that quick. What it might do is kill the insect as it leaves, and it may have some limited effect on onward transmission. But the trouble is there's so many midges about, you know, control like that is frankly not going to be effective. If you know the animal's infected, it would be quicker to kill it, and then you stop all insects transmitting from that animal.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Peter. So somebody wanted to just clarify the vaccination and just say, I think we've missed this, but did you say there is no vaccine available to cover this strain? So I'm not sure who would like to just.
Well, I can
comment that. Yeah. Thank you, Peter.
At the moment, no, there isn't a licensed vaccine that can be used in Europe for this strain. There are some live vaccines down in South Africa, particularly, but the trouble is they are live and they will result in the animal effectively becoming infected with a reduced virulence virus. But as soon as that happens, all your testing systems are dead, because the animal will come up positive because it's been vaccinated. So there is no way of following the outbreak anymore. That's one point. Secondly, those live viruses can interact with wild type strains and regain virulence. So it's considered, and is, in my opinion, dangerous. What we need is an inactivated vaccine similar to the one that was developed for type 8, or another type of vaccine that is entirely safe. So vaccine can be produced, but they have to be tested and they have to be licensed as safe agents for use. And that, unfortunately, takes a fair bit of time.
Yeah, okay, thank you. What criteria would be needed either in the shorter or longer term to deem the country free of BTV? Does somebody want to pick that up? Are we still currently classed as BTV free, or Mandy, is that one for you or someone else?
I think that's probably one for Pia, but I think maybe we would need to come back on that. I'm not clear of what the requirements would be. I know that there are lots of discussions going on about what it's going to take to get us free, but I'm not familiar enough with that legislation.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I agree. I think that I will have to make sure that we get the right question or the right answer.
Okay, thank you. Right, we'll look into that one then. Thank you, John, for that question. Okay, last 5 minutes. We've still got quite a few. We'll get through as many as we can. Oh, sorry, I'm losing my scroll capacity here. Oh, somebody said, I'm a vet in Denmark. I was curious to know what's going on in the UK. We don't have outbreak in Denmark. How do we not get an outbreak in Denmark? I mean, I think that's the magic question, isn't it? I'm not sure that's something we could possibly comment on. Are private OVs called upon to help with surveillance testing, or is APHA coping internally? We were briefly called upon with the avian influenza outbreak. This is from a practice vet. Pia, is this for yourself?
As I said, from my understanding is that in terms of the surveillance, we started using APHA vets and APHA staff to carry those early surveillance visits. But my understanding that now it's actually both. So we're using APHA and VDPs as well.
Okay. How many animals being found positive will it take before compulsory slaughter is stopped? Pia, I think this is you again. I'm sorry.
Somehow I'm a PHA representative, but I think that's more like a policy discussion. I think there will have to be as a discussion amongst the policy, and also to be informed by some of the findings from the AP risk colleagues.
Can I offer a comment on that? I think last time with BCV8, once it was shown that transmission was occurring locally through the midge population, it was deemed that the virus is in the midges now. Killing the animals will no longer have an effect. So it became a pointless activity. And I think that was an important consideration for stopping culling. And can I offer a slight comment on Denmark?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
The virus has moved north, and both the 2006 outbreak in the Netherlands and 2023 have been some of the hottest years on record in those regions. Really, really hot, with people dying of heat exhaustion and so on. And I think it's inevitable that those are linked. And so I think ambient temperature, the weather and so on is important. Denmark is a bit further north still. And although there were a few cases, I think, in Denmark last time, it didn't really spread. There is a northern limit to how far it will spread. And I think Denmark, if it's not too hot a year, may be lucky.
Okay. Reassuring. Excellent. Vanessa, this might be one for yourself. This might be one of the last ones, actually. Why do we know why there's more antibody positive cattle than sheep? Do we know why that is the case?
We think it's because midges prefer to bite sheep than they prefer to bite cattle, partly because of the size of cattle and the sort of skin hair of the versus wool covering, but also just, I think, I'm sure Peter has more knowledge on this than I do, but the midges seem to prefer biting cattle.
I think also cattle are regarded as, because these feeders track the smell, if you like, of the animal, the whatever it is, pheromones and organics, then cattle are bigger, they emit more of them, so it makes them a bit more attractive.
Okay, thank you. Well, on that note, we've not run out of questions, but we are getting to the end of time, and I'm quite conscious that we have been listening for an hour and a half. Now, if people would like to give us some idea of the content of the next meeting, the next series of webinars, please do. You can either put it in the chat, but once we finish this meeting, it will very quickly end. So the other opportunity is to put it in the feedback form that will pop up right at the very end. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our speakers very much for participating. It was very short notice, and you've all done excellent presentations and PowerPoints at very short notice, so I thank you all very much. Thank you everybody for listening. So just as a reminder, a recording of this webinar will be sent to every email that registered. So even if you didn't listen live, it will be sent to your inbox by tomorrow afternoon, sorry, so within 24 hours. The questions have all been saved, so those that we haven't been able to answer, we will look at and try and populate on the Ruminant Health and Welfare frequently asked questions page. Thank you very much everybody for participating, and I will draw the webinar to a close. Thank you very much.